I met David through Jackson Brown, and Jackson was the first of our little group of rebel musicians to meet David. And after he met David, he came back to myself and J.D. Souther, and Jackson said, you got to meet David. I'm working on it. When the time's right, I want him to meet you guys because you guys are good, and he should know about you. And he's starting a record company. These were the things Jackson told us. So Jackson was great, and Jackson did indeed introduce J.D. and I to David. And
what was your first impression of him?
Well, see, we used to read the back of album covers, and David's name kept coming up on all these records that we all liked: Joni Mitchell, Laura Nyro, Crosby, Stills and Nash. It's always special thanks to David Geffen, or something of that sort. David was real intense. He had a lot of nervous energy. You could sort of get in a room with him and you could feel the gears turning. Highly motivated, more so than maybe anybody I'd met up until that point. I hadn't met a lot of people in the music business, but he definitely impressed me with his energy. And he was like the savior for country rock guys. Everybody wanted to be with him. And David's not very musical, but he always knew a great song. Which I thought was interesting. It meant you didn't have to be, the world's best singer to be able to recognize, a good piece of work. Oh, there's my
thought that was me.
Hey, that's right. Oh, your time's up.
What do you mean not very musical? I mean, I don't think he is musical either, but if you could describe what you mean when you say that.
Well, David's not a very good singer, but he would always sing to me, "Oh, Joni's got this new song. It goes like this." Da, 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 da. He always knew when there was a great song around. And like I said, he was the guy that everybody wanted to be with. He was the most powerful. And when I met him, he was still a manager. He had stopped being an agent, and he had become a manager. He and Elliot Roberts had started a company together, and that's where everybody was. So, I met David, and JD met David, and we all hung out together a little bit up at his house in Truesdale. And then Don Henley and I went on the road with Linda Ronstadt. And I called David up and I asked him if I could spend some money making a demo. So we were in Muscle Shoals on the Ronstadt tour, and I went into the studio. I think David said I could have $500 to go make a couple of demos. Well, I got in the studio down there in Muscle Shoals, and I didn't want to leave, and we had 2 days off, and we almost went around the clock. I think the bill was closer to like $3,000. So I came back from the road, and I had this demo for David, and to be honest with you, it wasn't really very good. And, David heard first he was really mad that I had spent way more money than he had said I should spend. But he gave me one of the best pieces of advice I ever got in my career. He said, "Glenn, you're not a solo artist. You should be in a band."
And why did he say that?
Because the demo I brought back certainly wasn't 3 new Jackson Brown songs. I wasn't nearly as evolved as a writer at the time. That would come a little bit later. But like I said, he gave me the best advice I ever got, which was you should be in a band.
So what did you do next?
So I said okay. And so I talked to Don Henley, and Don Henley and I, we wanted to be in a band. We wanted to have a band together. So we were still working with Linda Ronstadt. So with Linda's help and John Boyle and her manager's help, we were able to attract Randy Meisner to come and play bass with Linda for a show in Northern California. So we got to meet Randy and tell him, that we wanted to have a band and we'd like you to be the bass player. And then Linda knew Bernie Ledden from the Burrito Brothers, so we lured him out to some. We were playing grad nights at Disneyland, and Bernie came out and sat in with us out there, and then we were able to talk to Bernie and tell him that we were starting a band, and would you be interested and stuff. So at that point, and I kept saying to him, I know David Geffen, and he told me to do this, and I think we're going to be on his new label, and none of this was really for sure. So then I called David up, and I said, David, I've been talking to Randy Meisner from Poco and Bernie Ledden from the Burrito Brothers, and I told him I know you, and you need to come to one of our rehearsals, or we need to start doing something now. I can't talk pie in the sky with these guys. It's they were a lot more successful than myself or Don Henley at the time. And so we finally got David out. David came out to a rehearsal. I think him and Elliot Roberts and John Hartman came to a little place in the valley where we were rehearsing, and came out and saw us play a few songs. And we sort of went on from there. He decided he wanted us as a band.
Were there some complications in terms of putting the group together? Was there another record label, Amos Records? Wasn't there something that had to be done there?
Yeah, we had to straighten out some messes. Don Henley and I were both signed to Amos Records, and we had to clean that up. And I think David made a phone call to somebody and said, "You need to let these guys out of their contracts."
I think he actually paid for it.
He made that. It's quite possible. I don't know what David paid for early in my career, but.
I think he paid $5,000. I don't think it was a lot of money, but I think he did.
To get me out of my deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe it. Well, we didn't have a producer, and everybody was going to the Troubadour just about every night and hanging out in the bar. And we were looking for a producer for our first album, and I didn't really like what I had heard in terms of the production on a couple of other country rock records, the first Poco record. I just didn't like the production, so I was thinking that maybe we should get, like a record producer from England, somebody who's more rock and roll, and kind of make a tougher sounding record, not a wimpy little country record. So we're sitting in the Troubadour, and I saw Glyn Johns. And I ran over to David, and I said, David, Glyn Johns is here. You got to go talk to him. He's the guy I want to produce us. Go over and talk to him. So he said, okay, I will. So he went over and talked to Glyn Johns and pitched him on, producing the Eagles. He said, well, I have to hear them. So Glyn Johns went up to two loggies in Boulder and heard us and passed. He said, no, I don't want them. And then I think I asked David to ask him again to come and hear us, and he came and heard us in a living room situation, just sitting around singing with acoustic guitars, and then he really liked us and said he would produce us. The thing about David, when he wanted something, he was going to get it, and nothing was going to stop him. If it took his charm, he'd turn on his charm. If it took money, he'd use money. If it took a ruthless approach, if he had to use muscle and grit, and then he would do it. But one thing about David, if he set his mind on wanting something, if he wanted something, he was going to get it. Nothing and no one was going to stop him.
Is that why everyone wanted to be with him?
Well, if you're an artist, to have somebody who's in your corner and, willing to really go fight for you and fight with the record company and fight with the producers and, the concert promoters, all that stuff. David was that guy. I think when David decided to start Asylum Records, I think Ahmet and Jerry Wexler all breathed a sigh of relief, saying, okay, now he's a record company. We don't have to negotiate with him anymore. He's not coming in here busting our chops all the time. I think they were, the happiest of all to see him start a record company.
What was Ahmet's suggestion?
Yeah, and
I hadn't thought about it that way.
That's right. They said, get him on the other side of the negotiating line. But I don't think anybody at that time had any idea about where David was really going. David did say to me, he says, don't worry, Glenn, you're going to be rich. I'm going to be richer, but you're going to be rich. And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened.
So he was pretty straightforward about the money part from the very beginning, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was, David was very busy, even in the very beginning. He had a million things going on. But like I said, we never really envisioned that he was going to become, this giant entity with museums and, theaters and movie production and hospitals and, all the other things that, he's accomplished.
I don't think he even did. I think he wanted to make money, but I don't think he didn't see that down the road. That was a series of very good deals and well managed, managing money well.
Yeah, but if you don't want more, you can't get more. And David always wanted more. I think that's very true. He was very motivated. And
tell us about the start of Asylum. Is the sauna story totally apocryphal? Were you in the sauna?
Yeah, there was one night we went up to David's to hang out, and it was J.D. Souther, myself, Jackson, and Ned Doheny. And he said to us that night, I never want Asylum Records to get much bigger than this group we have right here. Now, that was, I'm going, yeah, that sounds great. But, of course, it got a lot bigger.
You think he meant it when he said it?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe. Maybe he did. I think we'd have to ask him about that. But, we were with David at a time when, it was kind of Camelot in the music business. The people who were the heads of the record companies were all music fans. They signed people that they liked, whether they were going to sell records or not. Sometimes, they just fell in love with their music. It was very different than the way things are now. And it's funny, now when I run into David and I see him at Laker games and on occasion, we're always like, kind of nostalgic about the good old days and how much fun it was to hang out and go to the Troubadour and go to the Forum and see concerts and meet at Dan Tana's for dinner and do all the things we did when we were young.
The truth is, when you look back on it, and I wasn't in the middle of it, but I think it's probably true. What David says is, the truth is that there was this incredible amount of talent around, but nobody was signing them. I mean, he kind of filled a gap. Signing them in an important way. I mean, Asylum filled a gap, didn't it?
Oh, it was, certainly in the early days, it was the label. It was the label to be at, because you knew that you were going to get to do your thing, that you were going to get a little positive input, but you weren't going to be, interfered with. It wasn't like a record company was going to steer you and try to make you something that you weren't. David let everybody be themselves, which...
That was the basis of the company, wasn't it? Creative freedom for the artist?
Yeah.
If you could say that. I mean, if it's true.
No, it was true. Asylum sort of represented creative freedom. And, you could be yourself. You could make records the records you wanted to make, not the records somebody else wanted you to make. And David would work with that. I remember we came home with the first Eagles album. We went to London. We finally landed Glyn Johns and we went to London. We made the first Eagles album in 2.5 weeks. It cost $17,000 to make. And we came back and we played it for David, but there was only one song that Don Henley sang. And David insisted that we needed to have more songs with Golden Throat. That's what he called Henley. He loved Don's voice. Well, we all did. And so he made us go back in the studio and record another song. We actually recorded a Jackson Browne song called Nightingale. So, again, David knew, even on our first album, we had to keep an important voice. We couldn't just have one song from somebody who was as good a singer as Don. So he knew, he had good instincts about those sort of things.
Did you hang out together in those days? I mean, you say you were up at his house, you were in the sauna. I mean, were you friends?
In the first couple years of Asylum and the first couple years of the Eagles, we were. And we saw, a lot of each other. And he had he really had a hand in our development, including getting Take It Easy on the radio and getting Glenn Johns to be our producer. And, I remember another time, he just attracted all of these talented people, too. The people who were on Asylum in the beginning were, Jackson Browne, Judy Sill, the Eagles, Ned Doheny, David Blue. There was some talented people. In fact, I remember when we came back with our first album, Don Henley and I sort of looked at each other and said, we better start writing some good songs or we're not going to be around here for very long. So we started writing songs during the Desperado period, and David was still there. And then, but David had his eye on the horizon. He might have been standing there holding hands with all the young country rockers, but he had a vision that ultimately would take him far, far away from us.
What do you think that vision was?
Well, I think he saw himself, becoming one of the most powerful people in Hollywood, one of the most powerful people in the entertainment business. But, we never imagined that he would become that he would become a movie producer and all the other things.
When I've just got a question here that we're kind of slipping past it, and I don't know whether it's important or not. Let me just look at this.
I don't know either. I hope I'm helping you out.
You are very much so. But in those early years, I think it's important to say this. I mean, David, he was around for your artistic development, and he signed you. But didn't he also sort of take care of you and pay your living expenses and get your teeth fixed and all that kind of stuff? Or am I making that up?
Oh no, David was just worry about the music. I'll take care of everything else. And oh God, coffee, what a mess. No, David said, just worry about the music. I'll take care of everything else. Yeah, he put me on a small salary so I could pay my rent and get a car. He turned me on to a dentist to get a couple of bad teeth fixed. He really did help a lot of people at that level, too.
How did all the other musicians feel about David? I'm trying to get a sense of how David, besides having the vision to start this company and really signing the best talent around, how did people feel about him personally? I mean, he was a little unusual in that he was in a position and he was the same age as all the artists he was signing, which is very different from all the other guys. How did that affect relationships?
Well, in the beginning, I think we really felt David was one of us. He was our age. We did have, similar interests, and he was a big music fan. That was, the other thing that came across was how much he really loved a good song. And he liked being in the music business, I think, for a while anyway, till we all drove him nuts.
How did everybody drive him
well,
nuts?
you become successful and you want more things and need more things. I think David once said to Irving Azoff, this would be a great business if we didn't have artists. So, I don't know if he meant it or not.
Do you have any anecdotes from that period that would be revealing about David?
Well, you have to, at that time, Joni Mitchell, Crosby, Stills and Nash, and Neil Young, whether he was with CSN or by himself, they were the big name acts at their management company, and they got all the attention. And I always felt like we weren't getting enough attention. And America, they signed America at the same time, and America had had a couple of big hits, and they were driving around, in limousines and headlining in small theaters and stuff, and it was really where I wished the Eagles could go. And I remember once, and I loved limousines, and I always felt that was, that meant you arrived. So I remember calling John Hartman in the management company office and going, hey, I really want a limousine to take me to the airport on such and such a date to start this tour. And Hartman said to David, hey, David, Glenn Frey he's bugging me. He wants a limousine to take him to the airport. He says, you tell Glenn Frey to get a yellow cab and a hippie, okay? So, I don't know if maybe I pestered him a little bit. But David, it was like getting to see the Pope. You only had a few minutes, maybe you only had a few minutes with him, and you had to make sure you got all your questions asked and, all your wishes fulfilled, hopefully. Because David was, the phone was ringing off the hook in that office. And I was just like a puppy dog hanging around in the lobby.
Everybody was hanging around Asylum, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, right there. Well, even before Asylum, the management company, when they were up at 9126 Sunset, that place was happening. You could walk in there any day and see any number of music stars or music stars on the rise being there. It's what you did. We didn't have anything else to do till the Troubadour opened.
Describe the Troubadour scene in those days.
Well, the Troubadour was great. The Troubadour was our rebel cafe. It was the home of has-beens and hopefuls, and we all hung out in the bar, and you could sort of hear the music on the inside, through the wall. But that bar every night was filled with everybody who was anybody in the music business. And I used to go in there and, there'd be Gene Clark, and I'd sit down and I'd talk to him and ask him a bunch of questions about the music business. And then there'd be Dickie Davis, the manager of Poco. I used to road manage the Buffalo Springfield, and I'd go and I'd ask him a bunch of questions. And, there were a lot of people that I was able to just sort of pick their brains while we just sat there and drank Dos Equis and, waited for our time. But it was exceptional, actually. It was very magical. I mean, on any given night around midnight or 12:30, after everybody was all loosened up and liquored up, somebody like Doug Dillard would stand up in the middle of the bar and start singing Amazing Grace, and then everybody would start singing with it, and all of a sudden you're in this giant sort of drunken sing-along with all these incredible people. It's really cool.
That was beautifully said. I felt that. I wish I'd been there. You must have felt like you were part of a really, really special group of people. Lucky.
I think we knew at the time that there was something unique going on. And it just took a couple years, and then it seems like in the early and mid 70s, California music, San Francisco and LA music was sort of the big deal. So we were very lucky. The timing was good.
Is there a way to describe what California music was for a member? Because people are going to be seeing this film. Some of them are young. They're not going to know what that means. Try to get a sense of what the LA sound was. What did California music mean? Weren't you kind of called the Mellow Gang or the Avocado Gang or whatever?
Well, we were and we weren't as angry as some of the New York bands. We weren't as theatrical as some of the British bands. It was definitely more a laid-back thing. It was blue jeans and T-shirts and Heineken sitting on your amplifier, and it was a little bit casual, but we had our own anxiety. We had our own, look on everything. I think the summer of '68 and all the things that happened in Golden Gate Park and just that whole Summer of Love thing had a lot to do with the California mystique. But we were really, everybody's still fascinated by California. Everybody's, that's why everybody buys People magazine and watches Showbiz Tonight. People are still fascinated. I know I was. I remember we used to play the Eagles in the early 70s. We went back and played the Capitol Theater in Passaic, New Jersey. And kids would yell out from the audience, "Tell us about the desert." I grew up in Detroit, and we used to watch the Detroit Lions play football, and they were out at Kezar Stadium or at the Los Angeles Coliseum. It was December, and it was 75 degrees. I'm freezing my butt off going, God, I got to get to California. And we were, so, it's funny, the Eagles, we weren't pioneers, we were settlers. The pioneers were really the Beach Boys, Buffalo Springfield, the Byrds, those bands from the late 60s. That's what really made all of us want to move to California. And then we just sort of did our thing. But it's funny, it's really not, I don't think it's really California music. It's just music made in California by people who moved there from all over the country.
Because they were all very, very different. How did y'all find each other?
At the Troubadour. The Troubadour was really the place where everybody went. That's where I met every guy in the Eagles. I met Bernie Ledden there. I met Randy Meisner there. I saw Don Henley's band play on Monday night. The Hoot Night at Troubadour was a big deal Monday night. Had an open stage. You stand out in line in front of the Troubadour starting about 4 o'clock, and about 6 o'clock they'd open the window, and whoever was on the list, you got 15 minutes of stage time. So I saw everybody play there. I saw Henley's band Shiloh play there and noticed that was a good singing drummer, and that's sort of where we all met.
Whose idea was it for, I know you said this before, but I think I kind of want it a little bit more clearly stated. David said, don't be a solo act, get a band. But how did this particular band come together? Who was responsible for that? For putting you to, and you asked Henley to join the band, right?
Just a second, my stomach will start gurgling, and I'll tell you this. There's a guy named John Boylan, and John was managing Linda Ronstadt at the time. Linda was leaving her manager, Herbie Cohen, and they needed to go on the road and generate some income, and also they wanted to get Linda out of L.A. So in the spring of '71, John Boylan approached me about being the rhythm guitar player in Linda's band. He saw Don play with Shiloh. He suggested that we get Don Henley to be the drummer. He wanted guys that could sing background vocals as well, because she had a lot of songs that required that. So John Boylan put Henley and I together in Linda's band. And we went on the road together. And John and Linda were actually talking about putting together a country rock supergroup to back up Linda. And they were talking about, maybe we get Bernie Ledden, maybe we get Randy Meisner, we keep you, we keep Don. And Don and I said to John and Linda, well, that sounds great, but, we'd really like to have our own band. And rather than being upset about that, Linda said, I understand. Those guys would be great with you. And so Linda really helped us recruit the other two members of the Eagles by having them sit in with her band while Don and I were playing. And then we would go off after the show and tell them about our plans to put a band together.
Sort of a happy accident in a way.
Yeah, it really was.
Sounds like Linda was a very generous person about things like that. Are you still friendly?
I haven't seen much of Linda for a long, long time. I know she lives in San Francisco now.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But at the time, that was sort of the spirit of the time in Southern California, and what was going around at the Troubadour was singing with people and writing with people and jamming with people and singing on other people's records together and doing things like that. That was very much what was going on. And Linda was always She was always willing to nurture, somebody who she thought was good, find a good songwriter, record a song of his, find a singer she likes, get the person to do a duet with her. She was very instrumental in putting the Eagles together, and she was really nice to a lot of people.
So you go off to England, you make your first record. It's a huge hit, right? Didn't you have 3 number 1 songs on it?
Well, we had 3 hit singles on our first album.
I think I stepped on that. Could you say that again?
We had 3 hit singles on our first album.
So what did David do? Did he get you more limousines? I mean, how did he respond to that?
Well, in the beginning, David introduced us to Frank Barcelona, who was a booking agent, and when we went on the road for the first Eagles tour, they booked us with all of the heavy metal bands that Premier Talent had represented. So, I mean, we went out on the road and took a beating for the first year and a half. We opened for Jethro Tull and Edgar Winter and, a lot of loud bands, and we were an opening act with 1 hit record and half-empty houses. It wasn't exactly compatible booking, but it did toughen us up a little bit. And, like I said, we had 3, the greatest thing about having hit records is you're doing something right and you can focus on trying to do something better. If you don't have hit records, you start thinking, what did I do wrong? What do I have to change? So we were very lucky that, we had hit records. And I think David exercised a lot of influence to Take It Easy on the radio. I had never really asked him exactly what record promotion entailed at that particular juncture, but I know he wanted hits for his record label, which again was very fortunate for us because we were one of his artists. So he was making sure that our records got played. At the time, most of us guys, Jackson, myself, Don, we were all like 23, 24 years old, and we would do anything to be with David Geffen. We didn't even ask any questions. Here, sign this, it's going to be fine. Here, I'm going to get you a publishing deal. Sign this. Here, you're going to record for me. You're going to be my manager. I didn't care. I wanted David Geffen to be as involved in as many aspects of my career as possible. Then, in 1975, unannounced to any of us, David sold his record company, sold his management company, and moved into this other phase of his life. And, of course, he never really brought everybody in for a meeting and said, here's what I'm going to do. So we sued David for $10 million. What
was the basis of your lawsuit?
Well, basically it was that there was a conflict of interest there. David was the Eagles manager. David was the Eagles publisher. David was the Eagles record company. So there was like nobody negotiating with anybody. It was just us talking to David and David doing whatever he wanted. So he was able to sell everything. And so, without even knowing it, our publishing has gone to Warner Brothers. This has been sold, so we wanted to shake free from that. So we sued him for $10 million. And there was a big, front page article in Radio and Records saying Eagles sued Geffen for, $10 million. And, nobody likes negative publicity. And, we straightened out our lawsuit rather quickly. Things got fixed. Irving Azoff and David hammered something out, and it was all fixed because, like I said, nobody likes to have bad ink. I don't think David liked reading that headline. So,
Was that an unusual arrangement at the time?
Whatever you mean, the somebody being manager, publisher? No, I don't think it was unusual at all. In fact, record companies used to take artists' publishing as sort of an insurance policy. So if you go and make a record and it's a crummy record or it doesn't do very well, we still own the songs, and we always believed in the songs. When you come out, like I came out from Detroit as a songwriter, you just got a guitar case and a satchel full of dreams, and you come out to California, and all you really have to offer is your songs. So they take your publishing. But it all, then that goes on to this day to some degree, but it was definitely conflict of interest. We should have had a manager negotiating with the record company, but David was everything, he was everything to us. So we had no problem just signing on the dotted line and saying, tell us what to do. Can we make our music?
Well, I can certainly understand why that would be perceived as a conflict of interest, because it does sound like it. But hadn't he actually officially left management when he started Asylum?
Yes, he had. Yeah, he left it to Elliot, and then they had a couple more people hired at the company to do them, to handle the management end. I think I could be wrong about this, but I don't think I am. I think David got tired of all the hand-holding and coddling that had to happen with all of his artists. Everybody was needy, calling him up, for the most trivial of things. I need this, I need that. And I think he got tired of that part of it, having to be with all these fragile, fame-seeking singer-songwriters. I think he got tired of that.
I can understand that too.
Yeah.
Particularly if you've got your eyes set on something else. But Elliot, talk about Elliot and David. That's an interesting relationship.
Well, David was the businessman, and Elliot was sort of he was the friend to all the artists. David would be, arguing with Ahmet and putting tours together and doing this, and Elliot would be hanging out with Neil Young, getting high, saying, being Neil's friend and Joni's friend. And actually, Elliot was, it was nice to be with Elliot. It was good to have that sort of person, and I'm sure David, appreciated that too, because Elliot could spend more time with the people while David did what he needed to do. But they were an interesting combination. But David was the deal maker.
So when I'm just putting this together actually in my own head. So David officially leaves management because there is kind of a conflict of interest, but his former partner continues to be the manager, Lookout Management, and they have been partners and friends for a long time. So Elliot wasn't negotiating as a manager with David?
Well, that was the other problem, was that Elliot was not going to be going in there and, going toe-to-toe with David trying to change or improve somebody's record deal. So that wasn't going to happen either.
So when did Irving Azoff enter this picture?
David and Elliot, they hired Irving to put together all the tours, the nuts and bolts. Irving was an agent, and he knew all about doing that sort of thing. So Irving came into the Geffen Roberts management firm and started doing everybody's tour. And that's where we met him. And again, it sort of freed Elliot up to hang out with Neil and Joni and Crosby, Stills and Nash, and the Eagles too. Elliot would come on the road and see us as well. And Irving did a lot of the nuts and bolts work.
And so so after the lawsuit, what was the upshot of the lawsuit? I mean, you said it went away, but presumably did you get your publishing back?
Yes.
Could you say that?
Yeah. We got our publishing back. We got our freedom. We were able to change management. We stayed with Asylum. It was a good label, but at least we were able to negotiate with them now.
And Irving Azoff became your manager.
Irving Azoff became our manager. We were, like I said, the Eagles, we sort of felt that we were a second tier type act at Geffen Roberts, and we never felt that we were going to get up to the top tier with them. And I started talking with Irving about it. I said, I'm not really happy here. And Irving said, well, I'm not really happy here either. They hired me. They said they were going to give me a piece of the company, and now they're changing the deal, and da-da-da-da-da. And we kept talking about it, and finally we just both said, let's leave. Let's do our own thing. And it's funny. I sensed in Irving Azoff the same thing I sensed in David. An ambitious, driven guy, focused, going places, and not going to be stopped. And so we went with Irving. Was really, he became what David used to be when David left, which was this tough, artist-oriented, guy, bulldog.
Well, he in the interview we did with him, he described you and Don as being very savvy businessmen, very savvy about the business and knowing what you wanted. And given the scenario you've described, you remind me a little bit of David, because we can't figure out how David was so sure of himself coming out of Brooklyn and not knowing anything. How come you were so sure of yourself? Where'd that come from?
Well, easy, big fella.
I think I'm going to be joining you soon.
I knew I should have had that glazed donut to sort of absorb absorb the coffee. No, it's okay. A couple of my best friends in the early days of the Eagles were people in the music business. One was a promotion man named Paul Ahern, a guy named Bob Buziak, who ran Capitol Records. And we used to hang out with these guys, Don and I, all the time, and just talk about the music business. Who's got the hit records, who's got hit records but their tours aren't doing good, what tours are doing great, how records move up the charts, what stations play early, FM, AM, everything about the record business and the music business. I just had a voracious appetite. I couldn't learn enough. So when I met Irving, I was pretty, well versed in what was going on in the music business. And that's sort of, I guess, why I was unhappy with where we were at the time.
Yeah, I don't blame you. What surprises me is that more of the group didn't do the same, didn't follow suit, in a way.
Well, I was sort of the unofficial leader of the Eagles. I was, we were all leaders, but I was kind of unofficial leader on that business side. So I was the one that was always pushing.
Did David own the publishing for Crosby, Stills and Nash as well?
Yeah. I think I'm not sure, but I remember him saying there was at one point where I got to get this right. In the very beginning, David had I got to figure out how I'm going to say this. This is something I didn't even think about till now. I don't want to get it wrong, though. David told the guys in the Eagles that we should just all have a publishing company, and just whoever wrote what would just publish it with that company. And I think this was because Crosby, Stills, and Nash had argued over how many songs each person was going to get on an album. And he felt that, if everybody had shared the publishing, then there wouldn't be so much arguing about that. He was wrong. We still argued about who got what songs on what albums, and then we changed a couple years later and divided so that everybody had their own publishing. But that was not the case in the beginning.
But I'm just trying to understand something.
Yeah.
When I interviewed Crosby, Stills and Nash, they started by saying, we love him and we hate him. He sold us as an asset, and he's the one who got everything out of it, and we didn't get anything out of it. Did he actually fully outright own their publishing?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard for me to imagine that. It's hard for me to imagine that everybody there then followed suit and sued him for their publishing. I mean, I know he gave Jackson back his publishing.
Mm-hmm.
which he talks about as, he felt that Jackson had really operated as an A&R guy for him.
And that is the truth. Jackson brought to David all this other talent, people that Jackson knew from our hanging around the folk clubs in Southern California. So Jackson introduced him to Judy Sill, Ned Doheny, J.D. Souther, Don Henley, Glenn Frey. All of us were, Jackson, he really was. But, I guess that begs the question, well, why not give everybody their publishing back? So, it's funny. The music business is the only business I know of where people will go at each other tooth and nail, daggers, no hold bars, Texas death match every day, and then go out to dinner at night and see each other at a concert, 3 hours later and go, hey, how you doing? It's crazy.
Well, it's a creative business, and it's not unusual, I think. I don't think it happens as much in the movie business.
Mm-mm.
I think that musicians are a different breed. Musicians, by and large, are really very gentle people. Wouldn't you say? I love musicians.
Mm-hmm.
My all family are musicians, so I'm inclined to think that.
We may be a little more laid back, but not much. Maybe there's just a little, our anxiety is more hidden.
So talk about Desperado, your second record. I mean, that was some sort of an answer to everything that was going on, right? Or some kind of a statement about it all.
Yeah, we, like I said, after we came back from England and we had 3 hit singles on our first album, but there really weren't any other really good songs much on the first Eagles album. And like I said, Don Henley and I sort of looked at each other and said, we better start really writing some good songs if we want to continue to be at the company with all these other great songwriters. So Don and I started a songwriting endeavor together. And the first week we tried to write songs together, we wrote Tequila Sunrise and Desperado. We had been jamming with Jackson, and Jackson had a song called James Dean, and he had another song that he had started about the Doolin Dalton gang. And we decided, we were talking about, doing an album that was all about rebels. And, we would, pick and choose from, different things, whether it was, like Jesse James or, whoever. And then that sort of got shelved, but the Doolin Dalton, Desperado, Tequila Sunrise, that trio of songs led us to do a concept album. And we sort of felt that it was first of all a reaction in some ways to our own early success. And it was also us wanting to do something that was thematic and something that was important. And we went back to England with Glyn Johns and did that album there. It took about a week longer and cost us about $3,000 more. But I do remember that we came back from London with Desperado, and we were very proud of it. We thought we'd done something right. And I remember Jerry Greenberg, who was the vice president of Atlantic Records at the time, he got the record and he listened to it and he goes, God, they made a cowboy record. That was his reaction. And Desperado did not sell as much as the first Eagles album. Desperado didn't produce the sort of hit singles that the first Eagles album produced. But over time, it became a very important album. And we did the right thing.
Was David supportive of it?
Yes, I think David liked the Desperado album. And he loved Don singing, so he loved the title track. And he loved Don singing Doolin Dalton at the beginning of the record. He liked it.
I read somewhere you were particularly attracted to the Dalton gang because they'd all started off as peace officers before they became outlaws.
That's funny. Is that true? They all kind of turned? Well, Ned Doheny had this book called There's Time Life Book of Gunfighters. And that's what we were looking through when we, came across the Doolin Dalton gang. And there were other people in there as well. But
describe that whole wonderful photo shoot out in the desert. Of course, interviewed Henry and we've interviewed Gary.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They
Oh,
were
yeah.
so wonderful.
Boy, and you know, that's... Oh, David used to fight with the art department, you know. Gary Burden, always late, always over budget. You know, it was driving him nuts. But again, just like David, we saw Gary Burden and Henry Diltz's name on the back of all of these really cool albums, and so we wanted them to be our photographer and art director. So for Desperado, we went out to the Paramount Ranch out in the valley, and we just played cowboys for 2 days. We had horses. Actually, looking back on it, it was a very dangerous, you know, sort of wild and crazy thing we were doing. Guns, horses, you know, but we had a blast. We just rode around. We kind of restaged, you know, a few things, shootout, and restaged the arrest, the picture of all the dead Daltons on the ground. You know, we did that.
Were your guns loaded?
Blanks.
Oh.
But, you know, but still dangerous. I mean, we weren't exactly the masters of gun safety at that particular time. You know, we were out there, you know, having a good time, drinking beers, getting high, shooting guns, riding horses.
It sounds like every kid's, you know, wet dream. I mean, we all played cowboys and Indians. I mean, our age group did anyway.
The Desperado album shoot was a 2-day blast. We had so much fun.
I get my timings off a little bit. Sergeant Pepper had already come out, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, way before. Yeah.
But have there been any American concept albums?
Beach Boys?
Had they done that already?
Pet Sounds?
Well, I guess they had, obviously.
You know, I mean, I don't know if Pet Sounds was a concept album. It didn't really have a. Did it have a storyline through it? I'm not sure. But
I wouldn't have thought of it as a concept album, actually. So this might have been the first American concept album. Maybe Crosby, Stills, no, that wasn't a concept album either.
I don't know. Yeah.
Interesting. So talk a little bit more about how you feel that the sale of Asylum affected Desperado.
When did it happen? After that. I think it happened after that and before. Yeah, that's exactly right. It happened after that. In the beginning, I think we felt abandoned. You know, I think that we sort of felt like David sold everything and left town. You know, but I mean, he didn't really leave town. But I think we felt like he'd sort of, you know, made the money and turned his back on all of us, with not very much of a goodbye.
It seems peculiar and certainly questionable that he wouldn't have sat down with all of his artists or called each one individually or whatever and said, "Look, this is what I'm planning to do," considering that he created this place that was a safe haven supposedly for everyone. Do you think he just was afraid everybody would be pissed off at him? I mean, why do you think he avoided that?
I don't know. Did he ever say anything about?
I haven't gotten to that in the interview yet.
With him?
No, not that directly. I mean, I will.
Mm-hmm.
I will.
Maybe it was going to be too painful for him. Maybe there was too much history involved with all of these people, and he just didn't want to face the difficult conversations that were going to have to be had.
So how'd you learn about it?
God, I don't even know. I can't remember.
But later you must have really felt that, you know, some kind of... I mean, he sold it for the largest figure he could think of, $7 million, and didn't you go on to make significantly more money in 1 year than that?
Yeah, it wasn't, but, you know, it was a lot of money at the time, you know, and, you know...
In the end, it turned out not to be that good a deal for David, though, right? Considering the huge success of the Eagles.
Well,
far surpassed it.
Yeah, our story as far as it relates to David is really about the first 3 years of the band. He was instrumental in putting the band helping us put the band together, signing the band, grooming the band, he helped us do all of that, and then it was up to us to do anything. We did the rest. But he was right. He picked. He knew that we were the right group and the right group for Asylum. He made a lot of good choices, and he gave me a lot of good advice.
After, I'm just curious about this. After he sold, did you stay in touch?
No, definitely. Didn't see much of David for many years after that. It wasn't on purpose, but David was moving on into the movie business and Geffen Records and a whole lot of other stuff. And we were rock and roll stars by then. Our band was very successful, and so we were off and running and doing the Eagle thing.
How did the other artists on the label feel about the sale? Did everyone feel abandoned?
We didn't, I didn't talk too much. I didn't talk about that too much with everybody else. It's funny, by 1974, all of us who were sort of this close-knit community of troubadour-going, singer-songwriters, we all our lives all sort of took their own forms, and the road split, and our journeys went in a lot of different directions. So we didn't see a lot of anybody after 74, 75. But I was never mad at David. I never felt any anger. I just figured he was doing what he had to do, and I was doing what I had to do, and everything turned out.
I get the chronology sometimes a little bit mixed up.
Jessica, me too.
No, but Jessica and Emma have it down pat. So after the sale, you guys, came back with On the Border. Were you still with Asylum at that time?
Yes.
You were, okay.
Yes.
What did David have any part, or what role do you think he played in the success of that album, which was huge?
I don't think he had a lot to do with that record. By then we were with Irving Azoff. We were unhappy with Glyn Johns as a record producer. We went to England to try to do our third album. It kind of fell on its face. We only got a couple tracks cut. Went back to Irving and said we want to change producers. He suggested Bill Simzik. Bill did Edgar Winter and Jay Giles, and he had done The Thrill Is Gone by B.B. King. He was a very soulful guy. So we switched and finished the album with Bill. And actually that album came out, and we released James Dean and another song, Already Gone. Already Gone did okay, but that album was actually starting to fall off the charts, and we were in the middle of working on One of These Nights, our fourth album, when somebody pulled Best of My Love as an album track off of On the Border and started playing it in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And the phones lit up with requests. So Asylum decided that maybe we should release this as a single. So it was really Best of My Love that pushed the On the Border, the album, over the top.
And then you put out a Greatest Hits album kind of early on. Wasn't that David's idea? I mean, relatively early in the band's history to put out a Greatest Hits album.
We put out, I think we had just finished One of These Nights, and we put out a Greatest Hits album and One of These Nights, I think, at the same time. And we just had a big string of hit records. And at one time, we sold 1 million records a month for 18 months, which was huge numbers, especially at that time.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
That's amazing.
I didn't know that statistic.
I knew that you were huge, one of the most successful bands in history, but putting it that way kind of makes you visualize it a different way. Anyway, it wasn't David's idea to put out this greatest hits album. I mean, I
Don't know.
think it was. I think a lot of people said, "What are you doing?" He said, "No, I want to capitalize on this moment," which was pretty good for you guys.
Well, I remember they wanted to put out a greatest hits album, and I think we were probably resistant to it. And they told me, well, they have the right to do this. If they want to put it out, they can put it out. So, with that in mind, we put an eagle skull on the front of the greatest hits album, which was sort of bad karma, actually. And of course, and it's sitting there in a field of glistening white powder of something. It was an interesting cover that we put with that greatest hits album, but it went crazy. It's the biggest selling album in the history of American music. It's still ahead of Thriller, I think.
I think so.
Maybe Thriller caught up this after Michael's most recent publicity stunt.
I think I'm looking here at a statistic that says obviously it went platinum, but in its first week it went platinum, and remained on Billboard's top 200 for 2.5 years.
Wow.
Did you know that?
Well, we had a deep catalog. Yeah, I knew it was always in there. We don't just look and say, oh look, there's greatest hits number 14 still hanging in there. These albums that come and go and come and go, and we just sort of sit there in the middle of the Hot 100, keep selling every week.
I want to go back to Desperado for a minute because you're talking about the skull in the middle of all this. Reminds me kind of a lot of, I know we're almost done. A lot of hidden messages in Desperado. What would you say was the primary message about the music business that album represented?
Well, the fame is short-lived. They're going to get you in the end. Fame is fickle. It doesn't last forever.
Emma, Jessica, anything that you did?
I think you should talk to Don. I guess he didn't want to be interviewed for this.
He should be, though. He should.
But
we're not asking people to only say nice things about David. I mean,
Tell him how easy it
it's
was.
a real portrait of. I mean, we don't. We don't just make Valentines. We deal with the truth.
Well,
there's ups and downs and good and bad in everybody's life. And Don should feel free to talk about it if he wants to. I mean, we really would like him to. Are you still in touch and everything?
oh, we're very good friends. But that would be, if you wanted somebody to sort of push Don in your direction, that would be Irving. I think you'd call Irving and say, we'd really like to get Don for the David Geffen piece.
We did, and I think.
And then he didn't want to do it. Well, then he didn't want to do it.
Why do you think he doesn't want to do it?
Well, I don't know. I know, Don and David have a rich history of kind of going like this at each other during Don's time at Geffen Records. But I don't know a lot of the details. I think how do I say it? Well, David had a record company called Geffen Records, but David really wasn't there. And so Don's at David's label, but Don can't find David, and David's not really interested in doing much at the record company anymore, and I think Don didn't appreciate that.